Sometimes, the most profound acts of courage aren't found on the front lines of battle, but in the quiet, desperate defiance of those told to stand down. This is a story buried for decades, not in the sands of a foreign desert, but in the locked files of a military bureaucracy. In the chaotic final hours of silent evacuation, a decision was made. Leave a force of 1,000 Marines to an uncertain fate. This is not their battle story. It is the story of two women miles away in a sterile command center who saw those blinking icons on a screen not as assets, but as abandoned sons and daughters. When every protocol demanded silence and every order screamed for obedience, they chose to whisper, and that whisper became a roar that changed everything. The air in the Strategic Support Command bunker hummed with a low, electric anxiety. It was the kind of silence that was full of noise, the frantic clatter of keyboards, the hushed, tense voices of officers, and the relentless ping of data flowing across dozens of screens. In this subterranean world of artificial light and cool, recycled air, the war outside was a digital ghost, glowing symbols on a topographic map. Sergeant Elena Vance watched the display, her coffee gone cold and forgotten. Her younger sister, Lieutenant Clara Vance, stood rigidly a few terminals down, her eyes fixed on the same cluster of blue markers. They represented the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, 1,000 men, and women dug into defensive positions around the now-defunct airfield at Outpost Sigma. The order to evacuate all coalition forces had come down 12 hours ago. A sudden, sweeping diplomatic collapse had turned the host nation from an ally into a threat. The priority was speed and secrecy. Heavier units with more sensitive equipment were pulled first. The Marines at Sigma were to be the rear guard, a show of force to allow for a clean exit. But then the storm rolled in, a once-in-a-century weather system that grounded every aircraft in the region. The satellites showed the enemy's militia forces, represented by creeping red arrows, consolidating positions on all major roads. The Marines were not just stuck, they were being strategically encircled, cut off from the last designated extraction point 40 miles away. Elena, a communications specialist with 10 years of service, saw the staff colonel receive the update. She saw his face tighten, the almost imperceptible slump of his shoulders. He called the senior planners into a glass-walled conference room. Through the glass, she watched the debate, the pointing at maps, the shaking of heads. The decision, when it came, wasn't announced. It was absorbed. The red arrows were too many. The weather window closed for another 48 hours. The risk to the remaining extraction assets was deemed unacceptable. The plan to retrieve the Marines at Sigma was quietly, officially scrapped. They were to hold position and await further instructions, a phrase everyone in the room understood was a death sentence, or worse, a prelude to capture and propaganda spectacle. The bunker's mood shifted. The focus turned to the successful evac, to sanitizing data streams, to the next phase. The blue icons at Sigma were still on the main map, but the operators no longer looked at them. They had become ghosts in the machine. Clara, an intelligence analyst, felt a cold nausea rise in her throat. She looked at Elena. Her sister's face was pale, her jaw set. They were not just sisters. They were each other's anchor in the intense pressure of this place. Their brother, a corporal, was one of those blue icons. A direct challenge was impossible. They were two non-commissioned officers in a sea of brass. Questioning the command decision would see them instantly removed, their security clearance revoked. But, as Elena stared at the map, she didn't see a tactical puzzle. She saw her little brother, Mike, who signed up because he believed in looking out for the person next to you. She saw the faces from the holiday care packages she helped organize. These were not expendable pieces. They were a promise the military made to its own. Never leave a fallen comrade. That promise was breaking right in front of her. Clara was thinking in channels and backdoors. Her mind, trained to find patterns in chaos, was now seeking a flaw in their own system. The official command channel was closed. But what about the old, non-secure, emergency frequency the Marines at Sigma might still be monitoring on a basic field radio. The one used for atmospheric checks for LOSCOM's drills? It was a thread, a tiny, frayed thread. To use, it was a monumental breach. It would be untraceable to Sigma, but easily traceable back to this bunker, to the very terminal she sat at. It was career suicide and a court-martial offense. She caught Elena's eye again and gave a faint, almost invisible nod towards the service corridor leading to the backup comms room, a less monitored, older suite of equipment. The plan was no plan at all. It was a silent pact. They would find a way to send a warning. They would tell the abandoned Marines the truth. Let them decide their own fate. It was all they had. The backup comms room was a tomb of outdated technology, smelling of dust and ozone. Its primary systems were inactive, a museum piece in the active bunker. But for the Vance sisters, it was their only chance. Clara stood watch at the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, while Elena's fingers flew over a dusty console. She bypassed a dormant security protocol, not through high-level hacking, but by using an old maintenance code she'd learned years ago. The machine whirred to life, its screen casting a greenish glow on her determined face. The problem was the message. It had to be clear, but utterly deniable. It could not contain their identities, their location, or any classified assessment. It had to sound like a rogue fragment, a piece of intercepted traffic, anything but what it was, a direct, unauthorized transmission from the heart of the command that had just written them off. Elena typed, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. Sigma Beacon, this is Grey Wolf. Weather window collapsed. Official extraction package is canceled. Repeat, canceled. Your position is considered compromised. Acknowledge only if received. Out. She looked at Clara, who gave a sharp nod. Elena Presid transmit. The signal, weak and, on a frequency everyone had supposedly forgotten, slipped into the ether. They held their breath. For 5 agonizing minutes there was nothing but static. Then the console crackled. A voice, faint and shredded by distance and storm, came through. Grey Wolf. Sigma acknowledges. Gratitude. The transmission cut. The message was received. The Marines knew they were alone. Back at their main stations, the sisters operated in a state of controlled terror. Every glance from a superior felt like an accusation. Every phone ring made them jump. They watched the main map, now fearing what the Marines might do. A desperate, 1,000-strong breakout toward the original extraction point would be a slaughter against the massing militia. They had given them the truth, but had they only handed them a death sentence? On the screen, the blue icons did not move toward the old rally point. Instead, they began a slow, deliberate consolidation. Then, they started to move, but not east toward the coast and their would-be rescuers. They moved west into the vast, trackless expanse of the Al-Sharq Desert. It was a move so tactically absurd, it was brilliant. The enemy would not anticipate it. The desert was considered impassable for a large force, a natural barrier. The Marines, however, had something the command planners had overlooked: their own survival training and the rugged, all-terrain vehicles meant for patrols, not highways. The red arrows on the command map hesitated, then scrambled, confused by the move. In the bunker, a low murmur rose. The colonel and his planners gathered, staring. What were they doing? Who gave them orders? The colonel barked. No one had. It was impossible. The assumption was that the Sigma commander, a seasoned major named Russo, had guessed the situation and made a desperate call. A grudging respect colored the conversations. Russo's buying them time, an analyst said. But for what? They'll die of thirst in that desert in 4 days. Elena and Clara listened, saying nothing. Their secret was a burning coal in their chests. They had lit the fuse, but the explosion was beyond their control. The Marines were now completely off the map, heading into a void. The storm that had grounded the aircraft was now their only ally, covering their tracks with sand and rain. For the next 36 hours, The command bunker was a place of quiet crisis. The successful evacuation was being touted publicly, but internally, the fate of the Sigma Battalion was a ticking time bomb. The sisters could only watch and wait, the weight of their action growing heavier with each passing hour. They had defied command to give the Marines a chance. Now, they had to hope that chance was enough. In the desert, Major Russo's Marines were a machine pushed to its limit. The Grim Walk, as they later called it, was a nightmare of choking dust, mechanical breakdowns, and brutal heat. But they moved with a grim purpose. That cryptic message, Gray Wolf, had confirmed their worst fears and freed them from the paralysis of waiting for orders that would never come. Russo, a man who trusted his instincts, saw the desert not as a trap, but as the only card left to play. Using handheld GPS units and stars for navigation, they aimed for a single, obscure landmark, a dried-up well station marked on decades-old maps. Back in the bunker, the storm began to clear. Satellite imagery became available. The panic was immediate and silent. The enemy militia was in control of all the expected routes, but the Sigma Battalion was simply gone. The colonel demanded answers. How could 1,000 Marines vanish? The theory of a mass surrender was floated, but no enemy propaganda claimed it. The theory of annihilation left no evidence. It was a profound, embarrassing mystery. It was Clara, in her official capacity as an analyst, who saw the opportunity. Studying the newly cleared satellite photos, she pinpointed a faint, anomalous dust trail leading into the desert, and then a cluster of tiny geometric shadows near the old well station, shadows that looked like parked vehicles. Her heart leapt. She had to report it, but how without raising suspicion? She approached her direct superior with a carefully crafted analysis. Sir, given the enemy disposition and the terrain, if Major Russo suspected betrayal, his only logical move for preserving the force would be into the Al-Sharq. It seems insane, but it's the only area of non-engagement. There's a possible signature here at Grid Victor 7. She presented it not as certainty, but as the most plausible of several bad options. The colonel was skeptical. Sending assets into that wasteland on a hunch was a risk. But the alternative, the scandal of 1,000 Marines lost without a trace, was worse. A single, stealth-capable, long-range reconnaissance aircraft was rerouted. Its cameras found them. The Marines dug in, disciplined, and alive at the well station. They had found a small, subterranean water source. They were rationing, they were exhausted, but they were a coherent, armed force. The relief in the bunker was palpable, but it was instantly followed by a new problem: how to get them out without triggering the enemy. The original extraction plan was dead. A new, audacious plan was formed. Using the desert itself as cover, a coalition of special forces team from a friendly neighboring nation, who had been briefed on the Lost Battalion, launched a daring overland mission. They linked up with Russo's men at the well. Guided by the special forces, the Marines began a slow, arduous, but hidden movement south toward a secure border 100 miles away. It took 6 more days. During those days, an internal investigation began in the bunker. The Gray Wolf transmission had been logged by an automated system. The frequency was traced to the backup comms room. Security footage was pulled, but the angle was poor, showing only blurred figures. The pressure mounted. Elena and Claire were questioned separately. They stuck to a simple, nerve-shredding story. They knew nothing. They were at their stations. They had, like everyone, been shocked by the Marines' movement. Their brother's presence in Sigma was noted, but it was also noted for dozens of other personnel. It was circumstantial. The investigation concluded with a finding of probable low-level security breach by unknown personnel motivated by misguided loyalty. The file was classified and buried. The official story became one of Marine ingenuity and daring. Major Russo was quietly decorated for his independent decision to preserve his command. The sisters were neither praised nor officially condemned. They were simply transferred to different posts. Months later, their records clean, but their careers effectively frozen. They never spoke of it again, not even to each other. The secret lived in the space between their shared glances. Years later, when the story of the Ghost Battalion and its miraculous desert trek occasionally surfaced in veteran circles, Elena and Clara would read the accounts or watch the documentaries. They saw the aging Major Russo speak of a guardian angel message he never could explain. They saw their brother, Mike, now a father, talk about the moment hope returned in that desert. They felt no pride, only a deep, quiet peace. They had not been heroes in any storybook sense. They had simply been sisters who, when faced with an unthinkable betrayal of family, both blood and military, found a way to be heard. They had defied command, not for glory, but to honor a simple promise. No one gets left behind. And in the end, no one was. This response is AI generated, for reference only.